The Zephyrian fleet moved through the darkness of space like a pack of silver wolves hunting their prey. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. 47 ships under his command, each one a masterpiece of Zephyrian engineering and military might. "Admiral," his communications officer spoke with reverence, "we are approaching the boundary markers of what the humans call their territory." Kethvar's 4 eyes glowed with amusement. The humans had been remarkably quiet for the past 3 solar cycles. No trade ships, no diplomatic vessels, no military patrols. Nothing. The other species in the galaxy had begun to whisper that perhaps the humans had finally realized their place in the cosmic order. Perhaps they had retreated to their small corner of space to live out their short, insignificant lives in peace. The Zephyrians had built an empire spanning 17 star systems. Their technology was superior, their military unmatched. They had conquered the Altarians in a single campaign, absorbed the Kentoran Republic through political manipulation, and turned the proud Vegan Confederacy into tribute-paying vassals. Now it was time to deal with the humans. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, his voice uncertain, "I'm detecting something unusual. The boundary markers, they're different from what our intelligence reports described." Kethvar moved to the sensor station, his clawed feet clicking against the metal deck. The display showed a series of objects floating in space along what appeared to be an invisible line. These weren't the simple beacon buoys that most species use to mark their territorial boundaries. "Magnify," he ordered. The image zoomed in, and Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. The objects weren't beacons at all. They were ships. Wrecked, twisted ships from dozens of different species. Altarian cruisers, vegan destroyers, even what looked like a Kentoran diplomatic vessel, all arranged in a perfect line like a macabre fence. "Those are," his tactical officer began, but Kethvar cut him off. "Trophies," the admiral said quietly. "They're displaying their kills." The bridge fell silent. In all their conquests, the Zephyrians had never encountered anything quite like this. Other species either fought back with conventional tactics or surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. They didn't create graveyards as warning signs. "Admiral," the communications officer spoke again, his voice now trembling slightly, "we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from one of those wrecks." "Impossible. Those ships have been dead for cycles." "Nevertheless, sir, the signal is definitely originating from the Altarian cruiser. Audio only." Kethvar straightened his uniform and nodded. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was unmistakably human, speaking in perfect galactic standard with an accent that somehow managed to sound both casual and terrifying. "Greetings, Zephyrian fleet. You are now entering human space. Please note that you are passing through our memorial garden, where we've preserved the remains of previous uninvited guests. We hope you find the display educational." Several officers exchanged nervous glances. Kethvar maintained his composure, but his primary heart was beating faster than he cared to admit. The human voice continued. "We've been monitoring your approach for some time now. Impressive fleet you have there. 47 ships, if our count is correct. The largest force to enter our territory since the Altarian Armada tried their luck 2 cycles ago. You can see how that worked out for them." "This is Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet," the admiral responded, his voice carrying all the authority he could muster. "You will stand down and prepare for occupation. Your species has been deemed a threat to galactic stability and will be brought under Zephyrian protection." There was a pause, then the sound of human laughter. It was not a pleasant sound. "Oh, that's rich. Galactic stability. Is that what you called it when you glassed 3 Altarian colonies? Or when you protected the Vegans by enslaving half their population?" Kethvar's claws extended involuntarily. How could these humans know about classified military operations? "Your information sources are impressive but irrelevant. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally, or we will demonstrate why the Zephyrian Empire rules 17 systems." 17 systems, the human mused. "That is impressive. We humans only control 1 system, just little old Sol and our planets. But you know what they say about quality versus quantity. You mock your own weakness? Oh no, Admiral. I'm mocking yours. You see those 17 systems of yours? They're spread across a lot of space. Takes a lot of ships to patrol them, defend them, keep the locals in line. Most of your fleet is scattered across your empire. dealing with the usual problems that come with ruling people who don't want to be ruled. The human was right, and Kethvar knew it. These 47 ships represented nearly a quarter of the Zephyrian military. It was the largest single force they could assemble without leaving their other territories vulnerable. But us humans, the voice continued, we've had the luxury of focusing all our attention on one little corner of space. We've had time to really think about defense, time to get creative, time to ask ourselves important questions like, what would happen if someone was foolish enough to attack us? Your psychological games won't save you, Kethvar snarled. We have studied human military capabilities. Your technology is inferior, your numbers insufficient. Our technology is different, the human corrected. And our numbers. Well, let's just say you might want to check your sensors again. The sensor operator's face went pale. Admiral, I'm detecting new contacts. Hundreds of them. They're everywhere. Kethvar looked at the tactical display and felt his blood freeze. Where moments before had been empty space, contacts were now appearing throughout the entire region. Ships were decloaking all around them, rising from behind asteroids, emerging from what had appeared to be space debris. The Zephyrian fleet was completely surrounded. The tactical display on the Zephyrian flagship looked like a nightmare come to life. Red dots representing enemy contacts surrounded the blue markers of their fleet in all directions, above, below, port starboard. Everywhere Kethvar looked, human ships were materializing out of what had seemed like empty space. How many? He demanded, his voice barely controlled. 800 and counting, sir. The sensor operator replied, his hands shaking as he worked his console. They're still appearing. Some of these readings. Admiral, I don't understand how this is possible. These ships are running completely silent. No heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions. They're like ghosts. The human voice came through the speakers again, still maddeningly calm. Surprised? We've had a lot of time to think about stealth technology. Turns out when everyone in the galaxy thinks you're primitive, they don't expect you to solve problems they couldn't even imagine. Kethvar studied the formation patterns on his screen. The human ships weren't arranged randomly. They formed perfect geometric patterns. Overlapping fields of fire, multiple layers of defense. This wasn't the hastily assembled fleet of a desperate species. This was the work of military minds that had planned for exactly this scenario. Impressive positioning, he admitted grudgingly. But positioning means nothing if your ships lack firepower. We've seen human vessels before. Small, lightly armed, built for speed rather than combat. Those were our scouts, the human replied. The ships you saw were designed to be seen, to be captured if necessary, to give you exactly the impression you just described. We call it intelligence gathering. You might have heard of it. The chilling implication hit Kethvar like a physical blow. You've been watching us, learning from us? Oh yes, for cycles now. Every battle you fought, every tactic you used, every weakness you revealed. We've been taking notes. Your victory against the Altarians, for example. Brilliant use of concentrated firepower to break their defensive lines. We were particularly impressed with how you handled their shield technology. On the tactical display, Kethvar watched as several human ships moved into new positions. They were huge, much larger than any human vessel in the intelligence reports. Some were nearly the size of Zephyrian battleships. Those ships, his tactical officer whispered. Sir, our database has no record of vessels that large in human space. That's because you never saw them, the human voice explained, as if reading their thoughts. These beauties have been hiding in our asteroid fields, our gas giant atmospheres, even disguised as space stations. We call this one the Long Memory. She's been waiting for you specifically, Admiral. A massive ship decloaked directly in front of the Zephyrian flagship. It was easily twice the size of Kethvar's vessel, its hull covered in what looked like scorch marks and battle damage. But as the Admiral studied it more closely, he realized the truth. Those weren't damage marks. They were trophies. Pieces of other ships, other fleets, welded to the human vessel's armor like a warrior's scalp collection. The Long Memory, the human continued, carries weapons we salvaged from every species that thought they could take human territory. Altarian plasma cannons, vegan particle beams, Kentauran torpedo systems. All upgraded, all improved, all waiting to say hello. Kethvar's communications officer looked up from his console, his face green with fear. Admiral, I'm receiving surrender demands from the human fleet. They're offering us safe passage out of their territory if we turn around now. Surrender demands? Kethvar laughed bitterly. From humans? We outnumber their entire species 1,000 to 1. Actually, the human voice corrected, you might want to check your math on that one. See, while you've been busy conquering star systems, we've been busy with something else entirely. We've been growing. New contacts appeared on the sensor display. These weren't ships. They were structures, massive installations hidden throughout the asteroid belt, disguised space habitats, and what appeared to be entirely artificial planets. Population growth was always humanity's specialty, the voice continued conversationally. Give us enough time and resources and we'll fill every available space with humans. Your intelligence estimated our population at around 12 billion. That was optimistic. For you, I mean. The structures on the display were lighting up now, showing signs of massive populations. Hundreds of billions of heat signatures were appearing across the human system. 50 billion humans live in those asteroid habitats alone, the voice said. Another 30 billion on our artificial worlds. Mars houses 20 billion. The orbital stations around Jupiter have 15 billion. And Earth? Well, Earth has gotten a bit crowded, 80 billion at last count. Kethvar felt the deck beneath his feet seem to shift. The numbers were impossible. No species could sustain that kind of population growth in such a confined space. That's over 150 billion humans, Admiral. And here's the thing about humans. We don't like it when people threaten our families. Every single person in this system knows you're here. Every single one of them has voted on what to do about it. The vote was unanimous. Around the Zephyrian fleet, the human ships were powering up their weapon systems. Energy readings spiked across the tactical display as hundreds of vessels charged their guns. The vote was to give you one chance to leave, the human said. One opportunity to go home, rethink your life choices, and never come back. Because if you choose to fight, Admiral, you won't just be facing our military. You'll be facing every human in this system. Teachers, farmers, engineers, parents, all of them ready to defend their home. Kethvar looked around his bridge. His officers were staring at their displays in disbelief. The tactical situation was impossible. They were outnumbered nearly 20 to 1 by ships they hadn't even known existed, surrounded by a population larger than the combined inhabitants of all Zephyrian worlds. This is madness, he muttered. No species organizes itself this way. No civilization could function with these numbers in such a small space. You're right, the human voice agreed. Most species can't. Most species spread out when they grow, claim new territory, fight over resources. But humans? We learned to work together. We learned to share space, to build up instead of out, to turn every rock and ice ball into a place people could live. We learned that our strength isn't in our individual power. It's in our numbers. The human ships were moving now, repositioning themselves into attack formations. They moved with the precision that spoke of endless training and perfect coordination. So what's it going to be, Admiral? Do you turn your fleet around and leave human space forever? Or do you want to find out why no ship has ever returned from human territory? Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display for long moments, his 4 eyes processing the impossible situation. His military training told him to retreat. His imperial pride demanded he fight. His survival instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong with this entire scenario. Sir, his weapons officer spoke quietly, our targeting systems are having difficulty locking onto the human vessels. They're using some kind of interference pattern I've never seen before. All ships, battle stations, Kethvar commanded. We are Zephyrian Imperial Navy. We do not retreat from primitives regardless of their numbers. The human voice sighed audibly through the speakers. Well, that's disappointing but not unexpected. You military types are all the same. Too proud to live, too stupid to learn. Very well, Admiral. You've chosen the hard way. Across the tactical display, the human ships began to move, but they didn't charge forward in the standard attack pattern Kethvar expected. Instead, they began to spread out further, creating what looked like an enormous 3-dimensional web around the Zephyrian fleet. What are they doing? His tactical officer asked. Before anyone could answer, the space around them began to change. What had appeared to be empty void suddenly filled with shimmering energy barriers. Massive force field generators hidden throughout the region, activated simultaneously. The Zephyrian fleet found itself trapped inside what could only be described as a gigantic cage made of pure energy. Welcome to the labyrinth, the human voice announced. Took us about 50 years to build, but we think you'll find it quite effective. See, the thing about space combat is that it usually depends on mobility. Ships move around. use their speed and maneuverability to avoid enemy fire. But what happens when you can't move? Kethvar tested his ship's engines. They functioned normally, but every direction he tried to go was blocked by the force barriers. The humans had turned the entire region into a maze with the Zephyrian fleet trapped at its center. "This is impossible," he breathed. "The power requirements for force fields this size would be impossible for most species," the human agreed. "Lucky for us, we've got some very big power sources. Ever wondered what humans do with all those gas giants in our system? We hollow them out and turn them into fusion reactors. Jupiter alone could power most civilizations for 1,000,000 years." Through the force barriers, Kethvar could see human ships taking positions at key points in the maze. They weren't just randomly distributed anymore. Each vessel was positioned to create overlapping fields of fire through the narrow passages in the energy labyrinth. "The beautiful thing about the labyrinth," the human continued, "is that it turns space combat into something more like ground warfare. No more fancy flying around, no more using superior speed to escape. Just straight-up fighting, position by position, corridor by corridor." The first shots came from the human ships positioned above them. Not the devastating alpha strike Kethvar had expected, but precise, targeted fire aimed at specific systems. His flagship's shield generators took several hits, but the barriers held. "Return fire," he commanded. The Zephyrian weapons blazed to life, sending streams of energy toward the nearest human vessels. But something was wrong. The shots that should have struck their targets seemed to bend and twist in flight, deflected by some invisible force. "Gravitational manipulation," the human voice explained helpfully. "Another little trick we picked up over the years. See, when you're stuck in one star system, you really learn to understand gravity, how it works, how to control it, how to use it as both a shield and a weapon." Several human ships began to move through the force field maze with impossible grace. They weren't flying through it. They were falling through it, using controlled gravity fields to navigate the three-dimensional labyrinth like they owned it. "This is how we fight," the human said. "Not with honor or glory or any of that romantic nonsense. We fight smart. We fight prepared. We fight to win, using every advantage we can create." Kethvar watched in growing horror as his fleet began to take systematic damage. The humans weren't trying to destroy them quickly. Instead, they were methodically disabling specific systems. Weapons first, then engines, then life support. They were taking the Zephyrian ships apart piece by piece. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "I'm receiving transmission from Captain Vorthka's ship. Their weapon systems are offline and they're requesting permission to surrender." "Denied," Kethvar snarled. "All ships concentrate fire on the largest human vessel. If we can break their command structure." His order was cut off as something massive struck his flagship. Not a weapon, but a physical object. Through the viewports, he could see a chunk of metal the size of a shuttlecraft embedded in his ship's hull. "Railguns," the human voice said with satisfaction. "Magnetic acceleration of solid projectiles. No energy signature to speak of. Very difficult to defend against and absolutely devastating at these ranges." That was just a warning shot. "The next one will go through your bridge." Around the Zephyrian flagship, other vessels were reporting similar impacts. The humans were using kinetic weapons, simple chunks of metal fired at incredible velocities. Against shields designed to stop energy weapons, they were remarkably effective. "How?" Kethvar demanded. "Your technology level shouldn't allow for weapons this advanced." "Our technology is perfectly adequate," the human replied. "The difference is how we use it. See, most species develop weapons to fight enemies who are roughly equal to them. Similar technology levels, similar tactical thinking, similar limitations. But humans? We developed our weapons to fight ourselves." The implications of that statement sank in slowly. A species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who understood them perfectly, who could predict their moves, who knew all their weaknesses. Human military history is one long story of conflict. The voice continued. "We fought wars with sticks and stones, with swords and arrows, with gunpowder and nuclear weapons. We've had aerial combat, naval warfare, tank battles, and urban fighting. By the time we reached space, we'd already learned every possible way to kill each other. More kinetic projectiles slammed into Zephyrian ships. The human gunners were impossibly accurate, striking specific targets with surgical precision. They weren't just firing chunks of metal. They were using specialized ammunition designed for specific purposes. That last shot was a penetrator round," the human explained as Kethvar's tactical officer reported a hull breach, designed to punch through armor and detonate inside the target, very effective against heavily protected vessels. The force field maze was shifting now, closing off escape routes and opening new firing lanes. The humans were controlling the battlefield like a chess player moving pieces on a board. "Your shields are impressive," the human voice continued conversationally. "But they have one major weakness. They're designed to stop energy weapons, not physical objects moving at significant fractions of light speed." Kethvar realized with growing dread that the humans weren't just winning this battle, they were teaching him why no ship had ever returned from human territory. This wasn't combat as he understood it. This was extermination, carried out with cold efficiency by minds that had spent millennia learning how to destroy their own kind. The Zephyrian fleet was dying by degrees. Admiral Kethvar watched his tactical display as ship after ship reported critical system failures. The humans weren't just attacking randomly. They were following a precise pattern, disabling vessels in a specific order that maximized chaos and prevented coordinated resistance. "Sir," his chief engineer reported, "they're targeting our quantum communicators. 3 ships have already lost long-range communication capability." Kethvar felt a chill of understanding. The humans weren't just trying to defeat his fleet. They were ensuring that no word of this battle would reach Zephyrian space. No warnings, no distress calls, no reports of human capabilities. "Clever bastards," he muttered. "Oh, you're just figuring that out now?" the human voice asked with mock surprise. "Admiral, you really should pay more attention. We've been systematically removing your ability to tell anyone about this little meeting from the moment you entered our space." Around the flagship, the energy maze was contracting. The force field barriers were moving inward, compressing the Zephyrian formation into an increasingly smaller space. Ships that had maintained careful distances from each other were now being forced into close proximity, making them easier targets for the human weapons. "This is a violation of galactic warfare conventions," Kethvar protested. "You cannot use civilians in military operations. Those population centers you showed us aren't involved in this fight at all," the human interrupted. "Every ship you see, every weapon that's fired, every voice you hear is military personnel. We just wanted you to understand what you were threatening when you decided to invade our home." A new wave of kinetic projectiles struck the Zephyrian formation. These weren't simple penetrator rounds. They were something far more sophisticated. Upon impact, they seemed to burrow into the ship hulls and then activate some kind of internal mechanism. "Boring charges," the human explained. "They drill into your hull, find the nearest vital system, and then explode from the inside. Very difficult to defend against since the damage happens after your shields have already been bypassed." Kethvar's flagship shuddered as several of these devices found their mark. Internal explosions rocked the ship, causing cascading failures throughout multiple systems. "Sir," his damage control officer called out, "we've lost main power to decks 7 through 12. Emergency life support only in those sections." "The thing about humans," the voice continued conversationally, "is that we're really good at learning from our mistakes. Every time someone tried to invade Earth throughout our history, we studied their methods. We figured out what worked, what didn't, and how to do it better." Through the maze of force fields, Kethvar could see human ships repositioning themselves with impossible coordination. They moved like a school of fish, each vessel perfectly synchronized with the others, anticipating movements and covering each other's actions. "Your species fights like individuals," the human observed, each ship trying to maximize its own survival, each captain making decisions based on his own situation. "But humans, we fight like a single organism. Every ship is part of a larger whole." The truth of that statement became apparent as the human fleet began what could only be described as a choreographed assault. Ships dove through the force field maze in perfect formation, firing in sequence to create overwhelming concentrations of firepower at specific points in the Zephyrian line. "This is impossible," Kethvar's tactical officer whispered. "The coordination required for this kind of operation, the computing power alone, would be beyond most species," the human agreed. "But remember, we've had a lot of practice working together. When you've got 150 billion people living in one star system, you either learn cooperation or you all die." The Zephyrian flagship took another hit, this one from a new type of weapon entirely. Instead of a kinetic projectile, It was some kind of energy beam that seemed to pass right through their shields without any interaction at all. Neutrino laser, the human explained. Took us about 30 years to perfect it. Fires a beam of accelerated neutrinos that can pass through almost any form of matter. Very useful for hitting critical systems inside heavily shielded vessels. Systems began failing throughout the flagship. The neutrino beam had passed through the hull, through the armor, through the shields, and struck something vital deep in the ship's core. Our reactor is showing signs of instability, the chief engineer reported, panic creeping into his voice. If the containment fails, it won't, the human voice assured him. We've calculated the precise power setting needed to damage your reactor control systems without causing a complete meltdown. We're not trying to create a radioactive hazard in our space. Kethvar realized with growing horror that the humans had studied Zephyrian ship design in detail. They knew exactly where to hit to cause specific types of damage, how much force to use to achieve desired effects, even how to disable systems without creating larger problems. How long have you been planning this? He demanded. Since the moment your species conquered its first neighbor, the human replied. We've been watching you, Admiral. Studying your expansion patterns, your military tactics, your political systems. We knew eventually you'd come for us, so we prepared. The force field maze shifted again, and Kethvar saw something that made his blood freeze. The energy barriers weren't just moving randomly. They were herding the surviving Zephyrian ships into a specific formation. The humans were arranging their enemies like pieces on a game board. You see? The voice continued. Other species make the mistake of thinking that military victory is about destroying the enemy, but that's not what victory really means. Victory means controlling the outcome. It means getting exactly what you want from the situation. Around the flagship, the remaining Zephyrian vessels were being systematically disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Their weapons offline, their engines dead, their communication systems jammed. They were being captured alive. And what we want, the human said, is for you to go home and tell your people exactly what happened here. We want you to describe our capabilities in detail. We want every species in the galaxy to know that humans are not to be trifled with. Kethvar felt a surge of defiant anger. You think releasing me will save you? I'll return with the full might of the Zephyrian Empire. No, the human voice said with absolute certainty. You won't. Because you're going to go home and do the math. You'll calculate how many ships you'd need to overcome the defenses you've seen here. You'll figure out the cost in resources, in lives, in time. And then you'll realize that conquering one heavily defended star system isn't worth destroying your empire over. The human was right, and Kethvar knew it. The resources required to overcome these defenses would leave the Zephyrian Empire vulnerable to their other enemies. The political cost of such a massive military commitment would be enormous. Besides, the human added almost cheerfully, you've seen our defensive capabilities. You have no idea what our offensive systems look like. The threat hung in the air like a sword suspended over Kethvar's head. Offensive systems. The humans had defensive capabilities that had already proven overwhelming, but they were claiming to have weapons designed for attack as well. You're bluffing, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Am I? The human asked. Tell me, Admiral, what do you think we've been doing for the past 3 solar cycles while your intelligence networks reported no human activity? Did you think we were sitting idle? On the tactical display, new contacts began to appear. These weren't the defensive installations or the ships that had been hidden throughout the system. These were something else entirely. Massive structures moving in from the outer reaches of the solar system, approaching at speeds that seemed impossible for objects of their size. Mobile battle platforms, the human explained. We call them world ships, though that's probably too dramatic. Each one is about the size of a small moon, carries a population of around 50 million people, and mounts enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Kethvar studied the approaching objects with growing dread. They were enormous, larger than any spacecraft in the known galaxy, and there were dozens of them, converging on the battle site from multiple directions. The beautiful thing about world ships, the human continued, is that they're completely self-sufficient. They can travel between star systems, establish forward bases, even terraform new worlds if necessary. We've been building them for 50 years, ever since we realized that our defensive strategy had one major weakness. What weakness? Kethvar asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. Defense only works if your enemies come to you. But what if they don't? What if they decide to attack your allies instead, or target your trade routes, or simply avoid you altogether? Eventually, a purely defensive strategy becomes a prison. The world ships were close enough now that sensors could provide detailed scans. What they revealed was terrifying. Each vessel was armed with weapons that dwarfed anything in the Zephyrian arsenal. More disturbing, their hulls showed signs of having been recently used. Fresh battle damage, repair work, modifications that suggested active combat experience. Where have you been using those things? Kethvar demanded. Oh, here and there, the human said vaguely. There are some very unpleasant species in the dark regions between star systems. Pirates mostly. Raiders who prey on weak civilizations. They don't bother anyone anymore. The implication was clear. While the galaxy had been focused on the expansion of the major empires, humans had been quietly eliminating threats in the spaces between. They had been fighting a shadow war that no one else even knew was happening. But our main project, the human continued, has been exploration. See, while you've been conquering neighbors and fighting over established territory, we've been mapping the galaxy. We know about star systems that haven't appeared on any official charts. We've found worlds that could support human life with minimal terraforming. We've even discovered the ruins of several extinct civilizations. One of the world ships moved close enough for visual contact. Through the bridge viewports, Kethvar could see its surface bristling with weapons, launch bays, and what appeared to be massive industrial facilities. This wasn't just a warship. It was a mobile civilization. That one is the New Horizon, the human said. She's been exploring the galactic rim for the past 2 years. Found some very interesting things out there. Ancient technologies, abandoned worlds, resources that no one else has even suspected exist. The tactical officer looked up from his console, his face pale. Sir, the energy readings from those ships, they're using power sources I can't even identify. 0-point energy, the human explained helpfully. Extraction of energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations. We learned it from the ruins of a civilization that died out about 1 million years ago. Very efficient, virtually unlimited power supply. Kethvar felt the last of his confidence drain away. The humans weren't just militarily superior. They were technologically advanced beyond anything the current galactic civilizations had achieved. They had been learning from extinct species, acquiring knowledge that was lost to time. How many of these world ships do you have? He asked quietly. Enough, the human replied. But numbers aren't really the point. The point is capability. Each world ship represents a complete human civilization that can be deployed anywhere in the galaxy. They can establish colonies, build infrastructure, defend territory, or eliminate threats. They're our answer to the question of how to project power across interstellar distances. The force field maze around the Zephyrian fleet was dissolving now. The energy barriers faded away, leaving the disabled ships floating freely in space. But escape was no longer an option. The world ships had formed a loose perimeter around the entire area, their weapons trained on the survivors. Now comes the interesting part, the human said. We're going to give you a choice, Admiral. You can return to Zephyrian space with a message from humanity, or you can stay here permanently as part of our memorial garden. What message? Kethvar asked. Simple. Human space is off limits. Any attempt to enter our territory will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. Any attack on human interests anywhere in the galaxy will result in retaliation. Any species that threatens us will be eliminated. The words were spoken with casual certainty, as if the human was discussing the weather rather than declaring war on potentially hostile civilizations. But we're also prepared to offer an alternative, the voice continued. Trade agreements, technology exchange, mutual defense pacts. We're not interested in conquest for its own sake, Admiral. We just want to be left alone to develop in peace. Kethvar looked around his damaged bridge, at his defeated fleet, at the impossible display of human power surrounding him. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. If we agree to your terms, he said carefully, what guarantee do we have that you won't use these weapons against us anyway? The same guarantee you gave the Altarians, the human replied. None whatsoever. The difference is that we're offering you the chance to live with dignity as neighbors, rather than die gloriously as conquered enemies. One of the world ships was moving closer to the Zephyrian flagship. Docking bays opened in its massive hull, revealing launch platforms for smaller vessels. Transport ships began emerging, heading toward the disabled Zephyrian fleet. Those ships will provide you with temporary power and life support systems, the human explained. Enough to get you home safely. We're also uploading complete technical specifications for our defensive systems to your computers. We want your military analysts to understand exactly what they'd be facing if they decided to return. You're giving us intelligence about your own capabilities? We're giving you intelligence about some of our capabilities, the human corrected, the ones we want you to know about. Think of it as a demonstration of good faith, or a warning, depending on how you choose to interpret it. The transport ships reached the Zephyrian vessels and began attaching emergency power cables and life support connections. Human technicians boarded the ships, working efficiently to restore basic systems. Your crews will be treated well during the repair process, the human voice assured him. Medical attention for the wounded, food and water for everyone, even entertainment systems for those who are interested. We want you to go home with a positive impression of human hospitality. Kethvar realized that even this act of apparent mercy was calculated. The humans were demonstrating their ability to provide aid as well as destruction, showing that cooperation would be rewarded while resistance would be crushed. 3 days later, Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his repaired flagship, watching human space recede behind him. His fleet was limping home, their ships functioning but bearing the scars of their encounter. Every Zephyrian officer who had survived the battle would carry the memory of human capabilities for the rest of their lives. The humans had been true to their word. Medical teams had treated the wounded with skill that surpassed anything in Zephyrian medicine. Engineers had restored the damaged ships with technologies that made Zephyrian repair techniques look primitive. Throughout the process, the human personnel had been professional, courteous, and absolutely terrifying in their competence. "Sir," his communications officer spoke quietly, "we're receiving a final transmission from human space." Kethvar nodded wearily. "Put it through." The familiar human voice filled the bridge one last time. "Safe travels, Admiral. We trust you'll deliver our message accurately to your superiors. Just remember, what you experienced was human restraint, not human weakness." "I understand," Kethvar replied. "But I have to ask why. Why reveal all of this to us? Why let us go when you could have simply destroyed us and maintained your secrets?" "Because secrets only work for so long," the human answered. "Eventually someone would have figured out that ships weren't returning from our space. They would have sent larger fleets, asked more questions, become more suspicious. This way, we control the narrative." The Admiral studied the data packets his technicians had uploaded to their computers. Technical specifications, tactical analyses, population figures. Everything needed to convince the Zephyrian High Command that attacking human space would be suicide. "Besides," the human continued, "we've been monitoring galactic politics for some time now. The major empires are becoming unstable. Too much expansion. Too many conquered peoples, too many resources devoted to controlling territory instead of developing it. Your empire will face internal rebellions within the next 10 solar cycles." Kethvar's blood chilled. The human was describing classified intelligence reports that only the highest levels of Zephyrian government were supposed to know about. "When your empire starts to fragment," the voice said, "you're going to need allies. Species that can provide technological assistance, military support, economic cooperation. We're offering to be those allies, but only if you approach us as equals rather than conquerors." The implications were staggering. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were positioning themselves to fill the power vacuum that would be left when the current empires collapsed. "You're planning to reshape the galaxy," Kethvar said. "We're planning to survive," the human corrected. "Reshaping the galaxy is just a side effect. See, humans learned long ago that the only way to ensure long-term security is to create a stable international system. Wars happen when someone thinks they can win them. Our job is to make sure that no one thinks they can win a war against human interests." The Zephyrian fleet crossed the boundary markers of human space. Behind them, the memorial garden of wrecked ships served as a grim reminder of what happened to those who miscalculated. "There's one more thing you should know," the human voice added. "Those world ships you saw, they're not the extent of our mobile forces. We have exploration fleets operating in every sector of the galaxy, research stations in dark matter regions, mining operations in nebulae that officially don't exist. If something happens to Earth, if our home system is somehow destroyed, human civilization will continue. Kethvar realized the full scope of what he was facing. The humans hadn't just built defenses, they had created a distributed civilization that could survive any conceivable attack. They had made themselves effectively immortal as a species. We'll be watching your empire's response to this encounter, the human said. If you choose cooperation, you'll find us to be valuable partners. If you choose hostility, you'll discover capabilities that make what you've seen look like children's toys. The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in silence. Kethvar looked at his officers, all of whom had heard the conversation and understood its implications. Orders, sir? His tactical officer asked. Kethvar considered his options. He could recommend a massive military buildup, an attempt to match human capabilities through force of arms. He could suggest seeking allies among the other empires, building a coalition to contain human expansion, or he could accept the reality of what they had discovered. Set course for Zephyr Prime, he commanded. Maximum speed. The High Command needs to hear our report immediately. What will you tell them, sir? Kethvar studied the tactical displays one more time, reviewing the data they had gathered about human capabilities. The numbers were clear. Any military action against human space would require resources that the Zephyrian Empire simply didn't possess. The cost would be so enormous that it would leave them vulnerable to every other threat in the galaxy. I'll tell them the truth, he said finally, that we found out why no ship comes back from human territory. Because humans don't just defeat their enemies, they convince them to never want to fight again. Weeks later, when the official report reached the Zephyrian High Command, it would trigger a complete reassessment of galactic strategy. The age of expansion through conquest was ending, replaced by an era of careful diplomacy and mutual cooperation. The humans had achieved something that no empire in galactic history had managed. They had won a war without fighting it, and throughout the galaxy, other species began to receive similar messages. Direct communications from human space, offering trade agreements, technology exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. The humans were extending their influence not through force, but through the irresistible logic of cooperation over conflict. Those who accepted the offers found themselves with access to technologies and resources beyond their wildest dreams. Those who refused discovered that human patience had limits, and human retaliation was swift, decisive, and final. In the end, the galaxy learned what Admiral Kethvar had discovered in human space, that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one who wants to destroy you, but the one who wants to make you obsolete. Humans didn't conquer territory, they conquered minds. And once a mind was conquered, the territory followed automatically. The age of human dominance had begun not with the sound of weapons firing, but with the silence of enemies who had chosen not to fight at all.